Committee to order. Roll call, please.
Alderman Knipe.
Here.
Alderman Coles.
Here.
Alderman Peizik. Alderman Shockey.
Here.
Alderman Subak.
Here.
Alderman Talamy.
Here.
Alderman Wesley.
Here.
Alderman Winger. Here.
Quorum being present, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of May 11th, 2006. Do I have a second?
Second.
On a question? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. First item we have tonight is the DuPage County Circulator Study Update. Do you want to give us just a brief overview of that? What's going on with that?
Basically, that's been provided for your information only.
Okay.
We have distributed the meeting information to all dial-ride passengers. We also posted the information at our customer points of contact at City Hall. The consultants on this study, LCS Transportation, are also conducting 3 key person interviews on Monday the 19th. We did do a full presentation to the committee on this, and we'll keep you up to date on what's happening with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next item we have is a presentation. This is the fundamentals of a TIF districts. Phil McKenna from Kane McKenna. So I'll turn it over to the city manager first.
If you recall, the idea of tax increment financing area was first discussed at a strategic plan meeting last fall. We were able to define a basic area. We went out for an RFP for a consultant. Based on those received, we are recommending Phil McKenna and Associates to do the work on phase 1. We feel that his firm is best fit for handling Wooddale's first TIF district because of their expertise in the field of economic development strategies. Some of the municipalities which Kane McKenna and Associates have assisted in various forms of economic development strategies are Lombard, Downers Grove, Evanston, Addison. The proposal that we received from Kane McKenna Associates was most tailored to Wooddale's needs, and they were the most willing to work within the scope of the city's desires. At this time, I'd like to introduce Phil McKenna.
Thank you, Frank. Good evening. I will, knowing the hour and what you've been through, I will try to kind of walk through this quickly. And this is information that's in the handouts and information that at any point in time we can go into in more detail. Tax increment financing districts have been around since 1978. And, oh, that's really fancy. Okay. And they potentially are one of the most misunderstood instruments of an economic development technique. Why are they misunderstood? Well, sometimes they're overused. Sometimes they're used for the wrong purposes. Sometimes they're used in the wrong communities for the wrong reasons. Sometimes what really is happening is that tax increment financing is being used as a subsidization for development that doesn't need it altogether. The core of tax increment financing is not as complicated as it sometimes comes across. If you picture that you have an area that is in need of redevelopment, and in this community I think would be principally commercial, retail, office-oriented areas. And that area's assessed valuation has been stagnant, or in either real terms or inflation-adjusted terms. And therefore, as a result of that, nobody, school districts, community college, park district, as well as the city itself, is really seeing any perceptible tax increases. That area would be designated based upon a whole bunch of steps as a tax increment finance district. Once it's designated as a tax increment finance district, a base is established by the county, a base equalized assessed valuation. The base is set by the county at the time that TIF ordinances are adopted. So let's say in theory that that base is $10 million of equalized assessed valuation. in the continuing years of the TIF, whatever that base is, multiplied by the tax rates each year for each of the taxing districts, they still get. So let's say that amounts to be overly simplistic, let's say that amounts to $100,000. And that basically would be the level that they've maybe been receiving for the last 5 years. Something happens within that district. And the purpose, why would a municipality do a TIF if it decides to do it? It's really to serve as a fulcrum by virtue of some public investment coming in order to leverage much more private investment. So going back to that example, let's say 3 years out, now the equalized assessed valuation has doubled. It's gone to $2 million. The taxing districts still get the $100,000. Now there's $200,000. So that additional incremental $100,000, that's the tax increment. That tax increment is distributed by the county into a special tax allocation fund, which the city then determines, based upon policies, practices, and individual developments, what it wants to do with it. When is it the right tool? Well, it's the right tool to me when it's used properly. It's the right tool when it's not just a giveaway altogether. It's the right tool if you look in places like Elmhurst and Downers Grove and LaGrange, and you look at what happened in those downtown areas and the old infrastructure that was replaced, the additional street lighting that was done, the facade improvements, the improvements to existing businesses by virtue of renovation, that's when it becomes the right tool. How's it implemented? It's implemented by a process that takes a minimum of 150 days and up to 180 days and has tons of public input in it altogether. And how is the TIF financed? If I may, I'll just come back to that one. Stated it's been around since 1978. There was an explosion of TIF districts in the middle 80s, and actually in the late 80s, early 90s, I was asked to look at a TIF district right here. And for reasons not having to do with qualifications, but rather reasons having to do with the developer, the city council decided not to pursue it. Good reasons. TIF can be used for a potpourri of potential economic development incentives. The one that's most often mentioned and needs to be said is it can be used to acquire property. Now, we're all hearing a lot about condemnation and eminent domain. It would take a long time to go into the protections that the legislature put in to the taking of property in its most recent session. But in essence, the utilization of TIF to acquire property is not typically done by virtue of eminent domain. It's typically done by virtue of a developer who wants to redevelop a property or assemble several properties, and the price is too high. And if the city decides that it wants to help buy down that price in order to get a development in, it can do so using TIF money. That's what it really effectively is used for in terms of acquisition of property. It can provide for infrastructure. All of the downtown infrastructure in Downers Grove was financed through TIF district. Most of it in Elmhurst, including the parking garages in those respective downtowns. And of course, importantly, it can pay for consultant, legal, architectural, engineering, etc. Back to when is the right to? Well, will the area in question benefit from a TIF designation? A big part of that is what's been happening in the area. What's the past history? Has there been an interest by private developers in order to be able to, I'll just put all these up together. Obviously, I think we're focusing here more on commercial projects. But within any area you look in, and the city staff has done a nice job of identifying potential areas. So you look at, if developers are knocking on down the door to get in, it's not the right tool. If you're not getting development in, and you want development there, and you want the right kind of development there, then it is the right tool. If you think about it in this respect, okay, maybe a bad example in terms of what you want, but what did Rosemont want? Rosemont wanted to become a hotel convention office center. Okay? There's barely a square inch in Rosemont that's not contained in a tax increment finance district. There's been something like 500 parcels that have been acquired and assembled by the village of Rosemont in terms of its putting together all of that property that produces sales tax, property tax, hotel tax, etc. Out of those 500, I remember talking with their attorney at one point in time, about 200 were contested takings. That is where the private party didn't want it. All but 5 were settled out of court. And that's usually what happens in these situations. Obviously, Rosemont's entire infrastructure was built by virtue of the tax increment finance district. Now, take it to a place other than the extreme, if you will, of Rosemont. Addison set up its first TIF district in an area along Lake Street, basically just west of the city hall, about 12 to 15 years ago, and had very modest success with respect to it. If you look at Lake Street now, and you all probably know it better than I do, and you look at it basically from one end of 290 to the other end of 290, it's not all in TIF districts. There are 2 TIF districts that are along that stretch of Lake Street. But what happened was they picked strategic spots. And by virtue of those strategic spots, which are really one close to the Village Hall area and the other one far west toward I-355, where you have the large big box development there, et cetera. Through those, they've been able to attract other development because development begets development. Once developers begin to see an interest in an area and to be able to see that there's an interest on the part of the municipality to be able to provide assistance that will leverage their investment, they are much more likely to come. Okay, how's TIF implemented? Well, first you determine what is the area you want to be studied. Then you adopt what's termed a feasibility resolution. A feasibility resolution is an announcement to the community. We are looking at the possibility of tax increment financing. A brief 1 to 2 page explanation of it is put out for the community's consideration. It's shared with the other taxing districts who could be affected by it, and the study goes on from that point. Once you've reached a point in which an area qualifies under statutory criteria, and the council then looks at it, and the statutory criteria are either conservation area, which means more than 50% of the buildings in that area are 35 years of age or greater, or it's a blighted area, and if it's a blighted area, don't like the term, but that's the statutory term, it's either an improved area that's fallen into blight, or it's vacant land that's fallen into blight. And for example, there are 2 TIF districts in Park Ridge, okay, and the one in Park Ridge is right along a stretch on Dempster that is otherwise very viable, but they had there a series of auto-related types of uses, and they had severe contamination of the property. The only way they could attract development there over a period of 10 years was to set up a TIF district whose purpose was to take care of the environmental remediation of the property. That's what blighted, vacant, blighted, improved really constitutes. The Industrial Jobs Recovery Law really isn't applicable here, not only because you do very, very well with industry, but also because your unemployment rates are not up to the amount that would need to be. How is TIF funded? Again, there's often an assumption that if a municipality goes out and establishes a TIF, that they're going to issue bonds and they're going to fall into all sorts of debt. That's not true. It's a decision the council makes. Most TIFs are what are termed pay-as-you-go. So a developer comes into an area that, again, you've set standards for, you've set design guidelines for, you want to see new commercial development there. He meets those criteria, and he says, I've got to have new water mains there. I've got to have new curb cuts, whatever it may be, and these cost $250,000. Then you set up a pay-as-you-go agreement with them that to the extent that that developer, him or her, actually produces tax increment that is equal to the $250,000 that they're requesting, then they'll get it. They don't, they don't. It's a situation where sort of the ball is in their court to be able to do it. Usually on that pay-as-you-go basis, there's a developer note which evidences, it's just sort of like a bank line of credit. It evidences the requirements of the developer to build and your requirements to be able to pay them if they do build out of that increment. You can do, and obviously some municipalities have done, upfront financing. Upfront financing can be, and again, it's up to the city, it can be a TIF bond with a general obligation behind it. It can be a taxable revenue bond. In all those, I shouldn't say all, in most of those communities that Frank talked about or that I mentioned to you, there's probably been some combination of all of these financing factors. But the key really to this is that if you decide to go with the TIF process, everything is still under the control of the city. It is one of the few, if not only, effective economic development tools that's locally controlled. The state has guidelines that lead to qualification. The state has notice provisions where they need to be noticed, and the state has annual procedures for reporting to them. Otherwise, they're not involved at all. All the other taxing districts do have a role by virtue of being part of an advisory joint review board. Clearly, you want to listen to them. Clearly, you want to have their concerns expressed in your ultimate TIF plan. But once that's done, it's the city that decides if it's going to establish the TIF, decides what the budget is, decides what the plan is, decides what the principles are involved, and ultimately decides, makes any decisions with respect to redevelopment agreements. So that's the summary.
I have a question for you, Mr. McKenna. I have a question for you.
Sir.
Here. Okay. The length of a TIF, I mean, usually it's what, 20, 25 years?
The maximum under law is 23 years.
Okay, 23 years.
Correct.
Can you establish a TIF, though, for any period?
You can. I would never advise a client, and I've been involved in the establishment of 200 to 250 TIFs. Anything less than 15 years doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And it basically doesn't make sense for two reasons. One, if you get a TIF established, you need time to
Get the money.
to fine-tune your development plan and to attract development in there. And then because of the property tax cycle in Illinois, you're going to have another, so you're going to have 5 years out of that, even 15 burned off. And if you get to a point where you have 10 years or less of cash flow coming out of it, it's not worth it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Alderman Subak.
One of the things you said is we're kind of focusing it on for commercial, but part of the area that we've identified is along Potter Street, and that it's south of Irving. That area is industrial right now that abuts our residential, so we wouldn't be looking to eliminate the industrial to go to commercial there. It'd be more of a elimination of the commercial to go to residential, so it's almost like zoning out an obsolete use. One of the comments I asked the attorney before he left is I represent one of the landowners in there, and I asked him if I need to recuse myself, and he advised me because we're having general discussions about TIFs that I don't need to do that at this point. But if it goes further with adopting a TIF for that area, I will recuse myself at that point. With respect to zoning out a use or doing a TIF to get rid of a use, is it somewhat because like there's a new industrial building in that area going up right now that is currently being constructed. Is it kind of a double hit for the school district if we're changing this area from an industrial to a residential and doing the TIF, that we're almost freezing the taxes for a period of time, maybe 23 years, but also now sending children to a school when they don't have them in this area now? They only have, the schools are thrilled with this area because they get tax revenue, they don't get any children. As a city, we're not thrilled with it because we have neighbors complaining about the industrial over there. So, but when you go from industrial to residential, is that like a double hit for the school district?
It can be. Part of it is what is the industrial assessed at? I mean, you'd actually be shocked, I think, at how many, especially major industries, don't protest their taxes. And that, so part of the initial evaluation of TIF is what is the current level of property taxes? What's the current level of equalized assessed valuation? It's a financial tool as well. Having said that, I would say that residential TIFs, principally residential TIFs, are the most difficult to do, and in my own opinion, my own professional opinion, make the least sense. And part of that is because they do have the greatest impact whatsoever on school districts. And yes, you're absolutely correct that changing industrial, which brings in pure property taxes and no expenses in terms of students, to residential is going to have an impact on the school districts. Residential obviously is in TIF districts now, particularly in downtown transit-oriented districts, because it's a use that helps condos, townhomes, whatever, and particularly in those transit-oriented districts, help drive the retail in there. If you were to otherwise look to do a TIF district for solely residential, A, I probably would advise against it, and B, there are many, many more complications in trying to do that statutorily. Statutorily, it's become very difficult to do just freestanding residential utilizing TIF dollars.
Because and the other, I guess, is the question on the assessed value is, I don't know what Wooddale generates in sales tax or property taxes in this area that's up on the map that's south of Irving Park Road, but when we change that potentially to a residential district, we potentially then, the services that we need to put into those as far as police, city services, my guess is goes up a little bit compared to the industrial uses that are there now. But we do, on a positive, get rid of that in somewhat blighted industrial area.
If we could right now, we would kind of like to walk you through the area. And at Phil's advice, we added the area that's directly adjacent to Irving Park, and Roger will kind of explain it, and Jeff has taken some pictures to really take a look at what you're talking about here. And it's true, there's one new building that hasn't been occupied. It's basically a small shell building, but when you look at some of the pictures, you'll get a feeling for what it looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. What's on the screen now outlined in red is the proposed TIF district. And as you can see, it is bounded on the south curb line of Irving Park Road to the north curb line along Potter Street. The western boundary is the eastern lot line of the present Giorgio's site, which will be eventually the Wooddale Station condominium mixed-use development. Then on the east, it goes to the rear lots along the east side of Edgewood. And then there's a small portion of the lower right-hand corner, which encompasses 3 commercial structures and is adjacent to our present detention there at Pine and Potter. What I will do next is I'll be showing just some random photographs that were taken by the assistant city manager of the area, just to give you kind of a feel for, just in case you haven't been through the area recently. But these are some pictures of, excuse me, some of the structures and their surrounding deposits, so to speak. Yeah, many of these structures were built 40, 50 years ago, and currently we're attempting to determine what age and useful lifespan we have concern with the infrastructure, your storm sewers, water, as well as utilities, which would most likely have to be replaced and can be funded through this specific TIF districting. Another issue too that we would like to bring up too is, as you can, Jeff's going through these, they're on autopilot. But if we can get eventually get back to the actual redlined diagram, we would like to bring up another issue that will be playing into the overall view of this situation, and that specifically would be the railroad crossing at Ash Street. And I do believe at this point in time,
Roger, can I interrupt you real quick?
certainly,
Just to give everybody a, those are all the ones we just showed. Those are all ones that have access off of Irving Park Road, which I think that you can derive some kind of commercial development along there. The ones that are south of the railroad tracks, those have access off of Potter Street, but to the far east where that ends, that is where, I don't know if it'll ever get built, but that is the Elmhurst Builders or Frank Judas row houses that were previously approved along the railroad tracks on that vacant land. So that I'm excited about to see if those row houses will do what Mr. McKenna said, spark some development on its own potentially. And Roger's pointing out the single-family homes that have been approved that'll go in there. So there is some redevelopment already going in outside that red area currently that is south of the railroad tracks.
you are correct, Alderman. The area in question, basically this particular boundary area, is the Arbor Woods development. And recently, as of actually this afternoon, the final the final engineering submittals have been approved. And I unfortunately didn't get a chance to look at them before I came to this meeting, but there was a suggestion by Mr. Judas from Elmhurst Builders that there will not be any residences here along the North Potter between the Railroad ROW and Potter Street. That will be used for detention. So until I get a chance to review that report, there's the possibility that there won't be additional single-family or attached single-family residences there. But the point in question here with regard to these commercial properties being replaced by residential, this is a better fit for our residents who presently live in that area. As the city manager has stated, we do get numerous complaints at various times of the year, depending upon what types of activities are going there. A piece of property here at Ash Street and Potter is a marble and stone cutting enterprise, and there are times during the year when there are clouds of cutting dust and other things infiltrating into the residential area. And there has also been additional talk between Central Avenue and actually Ash Street to be placing single-family detached dwellings in this particular area, so they would not be attached single-family or multi-use properties. The Ash Street railroad crossing is something that does have to be looked at and addressed, and this most likely will have to involve the installation of a traffic signal in order to make the area not only safe and secure, but also to have it as a betterment for means of ingress and egress for the mixed use or commercial developments that are going to be in and along Irving Park Road. And I do believe the city manager had a comment or two on the Ash Street traffic signal.
Before you go on, can we go back? Because, I mean, can you start flipping through the pictures? Do we have more pictures? Do we have some of the pictures from the other side too?
Yeah, yes, we do. You want to see those from the other
Yeah,
side?
I
Yes,
mean, while
those
we're
are-
talking here, so, I
Okay.
mean, we can let you talk, but we can at least look at the pictures too, so.
Okay, first
all
of
have
all,
a-
these are the Irving Park again. You can see that these buildings are, you know,
Okay, slow down. There we go,
Yeah.
okay.
They basically are too small. They can't be retrofitted. The spaces are too small. There's no parking. It's not going to develop on its own. We've had some inquiries and people have come in to get permits to try to redo the buildings and they're just not happening. They're setback, there's not enough space for parking. The whole area has to be redone to encourage some kind of retail use that would be a benefit. The idea of doing phase one would be determine the economic viability of the area. Okay, we're still looking at those off of Irving Park. Still looking at those. You can see all the wasted space. Here's the Potter locations. The types of buildings. We're going to have harder times trying to fill these buildings, and they're going to fall in disuse and disarray. There's only one building on this entire area that is new, and they still haven't had anybody rent it out. There's not a lot of parking.
Okay.
That's all you have. Huh? Oh, wait.
Okay.
Is that it, Jeff? If you go back, I thought we'd get some shots of some of the rear storage yards. There's all kinds of vehicles stored there, and we'll have to check the soil for contamination. It's truly, we feel, a visual blight, and we're thinking it's probably not going to be hard to get that designated.
Yeah, I've driven by, but certainly not looked at it in detail. There are, if more than 50% of the buildings are 35 years of age or older, and if we were retained, that would be one of the first steps we would do in the study by virtue of checking both city and county records as to the age of the buildings. If that's the case, then there's 13 factors under the Act, and in order to qualify, an area as a whole, not every parcel, an area as a whole, needs to meet 3 of those criteria. If you don't have the age, then it's 5 of those criteria. So along with the financial analysis Frank referred to, we would also be doing an initial analysis to say whether or not it's eligible. And if it's eligible, is it, what are the specific eligibility criteria and how they would be addressed?
We've also had some interest from a couple businesses in our community moving down